My parents are not racist and they've never been racist. My family for many generations have lived near and around Black people. And look, my views about Black people and their views about Black people are shaped with experiences with Black people. But now what you have in the city is that there's no accountability for the Black people. And now Chicago has become a complete dump because these teenagers go out and they take over the city. They call them teen takeovers. They all come from the same neighborhood. They drive up there and they mug people and attack people and they destroy cars and destroy shops. And I know there's a lot of Black people that feel the same way about this. They say, we've lost control of the city and we're looking for accountability. We have a lot of Black people that are always outraged about racism, outraged about attitudes from white people, but they're never ashamed of some of these behaviors, never ashamed of some of the things that go on. And that's why I think there's a lot of negative attitudes these days.
What is the proper response to this? To Nick Fuentes' claim that you have non-whites, he's specifically talking about the Black population, in terms of violent crime, it is at a higher percentage when it comes to these demographics. Like, how can you address that in a compelling way and not engage in what Piers Morgan is about to do, which is just liberal denialism and saying that, well, this is just racist, this is politically incorrect, how dare you, like clutching his pearls. Like, how can you respond? And this is an important exercise for Muslims who are engaged in these debates online or with family or whatever, because we're immigrants, like many of us are immigrants or from immigrant backgrounds. One thing that this comment, Relatable Panda, is saying, he's saying, to be honest, I get where anti-immigration folks are coming from. I won't want my homogenous country to lose its original demographics, but Australia and America are different because they're already majority mixed race. I don't think this is true at all. I think that many Muslim countries are also highly diverse in terms of ethnic makeup, and they're kind of designed that way when they drew up the borders with the Sykes-Picot Agreement earlier in the 20th century. You have a country now called Iraq, and here are the borders, and it's multiple ethnic groups that are living in Iraq, living in Jordan or Transjordan, living in what we define as Syria. Look at how diverse Syria is, not only in terms of ethnicity, but also in terms of religion. Same could go for any number of these Muslim nations. They're very ethnically diverse, and they have a lot of mixing, genetic mixing as well. It's not just America and Australia or Europe. So this is factually incorrect. I like this comment. It's simple. They ruin the family structure of Blacks and push drugs into their communities. Yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. And what is this system that is doing this? It is a liberal world order, is what destroys families. Feminism destroys families. And it is Blacks who have been targeted very specifically by the media. They've been targeted by feminists. They've been targeted by white supremacists, actually. Planned Parenthood, these abortion clinics have been explicitly established within Black communities as a kind of population control of Blacks and a kind of eugenics program. Like, this was a deliberate plan to reduce the Black population, to promote degeneracy, to promote fornication, etc. And then drugs as well. And now that same liberal system is increasingly affecting the whites. So you see there are entire cities that have been destroyed because of the opioid epidemic. There was a crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s that decimated the Black community, the Black American community. And now you have the opioid epidemic over the past 20 years that has decimated many white lower class communities. So this is definitely a major piece of what we see with Black crime, but it's not the entire piece, because they'll say that, okay, even if you will control for socioeconomic factors, there's still a racial prevalence amongst this demographic, amongst Black Africans. And the response to that is, well, first of all, look at African countries, traditional African countries, Muslims in Africa, and you'll see they have very low rates of crime. They still have preserved a traditional family structure. They're still preserving a kind of traditional tribal religious structure. And that makes a big difference, because when people are in a tribal structure where they are accountable not only to their families, but also to the tribe, to the community, they'll regulate their behavior. They're also going to get married young. And that is one of the biggest preventatives of violent crime, is when people are married and they have a wife and children, they avoid violent crime because they're trying to take care of their family. You have an organic, ground up type of structure and order that is cultivated because of strong families, strong tribes, strong religion. But as soon as you start secularizing, as soon as you start introducing progressivism, you start introducing feminism, you start telling women, hey, you need to not get married young, you need to go and pursue an education and pursue a career. As soon as you start telling people that the most important thing is to get yours and to enjoy life, as opposed to sacrificing for others, sacrificing for God, sacrificing for your people, As soon as you start introducing this liberal secular morality and the psychology that comes with it, that's when you see an explosion of crime. You see an explosion of drug use. Now, again, what about the racial factor? Well, this can also be explained by the fact that some races just do better and they are able to thrive more under certain kind of social structures. So if you have a more traditional society, certain races are going to thrive better in that traditional society. And I think that might be the case for blacks. It might be the case for Arabs. It might be the case for certain demographics. Whereas if you take away the traditional structure, the traditional values, that traditional society, and you make it a secular society, they're going to behave worse than whites. Whites are also going to behave worse. Asians are also going to behave worse under a secular system as opposed to a traditional system, but they're going to be able to cope better as opposed to other races. It's not racist to acknowledge that. You're not denigrating a race by saying that certain environments are going to be more toxic, more difficult to cope with or adapt to, or it's going to take more time. Like whites could be, or Asians or Jews are able to cope in a secular system and take advantage of that secular system for their benefit better than other races. That doesn't mean that they're superior. It just means that they're able to cope with a toxic system. They're able to adapt to a toxic system because of whatever genetic background. Like that's the type of argument that I make in debates. Like when I'm debating someone, some of these white nationalists, this is the argument that I make, and they can't cope with it. Like these white nationalists can't really address that type of argument because who is responsible for creating liberal secularism? Which races are associated with ushering in this system, this liberal secular system? It is the white supremacist Europeans in the Enlightenment. And which groups adopted it? It's the Jews who adopted this liberal system. They were early adopters. The whites were the first, then the Jews in Europe. So they've had a longer period of time to adapt and evolve and take on this kind of secular system as opposed to other races. And that can explain the discrepancy in violent crime and dysfunction. That's my answer. And I think it's something that's concordant with an Islamic perspective. It's concordant with the facts, as opposed to just denying the facts like Piers Morgan does, or some of these liberal Muslims do, or people who are duped by liberalism.
You've also said you don't want to live near black people. Let's take a listen to this clip.
I'm a new generation of white person. I'm not living around blacks. Sorry. I want white kids, and I don't want my white kids bringing home black people to marry. It's racial for me. And call me racist. Oh, very Christian of you. I don't give a fuck.
I mean, it couldn't be clearer, really. You're basically saying, yeah, I'm a racist, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
You're fine with saying you're a racist?
Totally. I think everybody's racist. The only people that aren't racist or pretend not to be are white people to their detriment. Everybody else is racist.
I mean, this is something that has a basis just biologically. It's called in-group preference. So people who share similarities are going to be less hostile to each other. Musa is saying, according to the Muslim point of view, this is totally wrong. Let me just give you a very common anecdote that a lot of Muslims experience. You're a Muslim man and you're trying to get married, and you are Pakistani, and you want to marry a girl who is Bangladeshi, and you go and you try to propose to the father of this Bangladeshi woman, and they say, excuse me, you're Pakistani? Sorry, we're only going to marry Bangladeshis. Or you're Pakistani, you're trying to marry the Saudi girl. You go to the parents. They're very religious parents, by the way, very religious. You know, they're living in Mecca, actually. They're living in Medina. You want to go marry her? They say, actually, sorry, you're not even Arab. You're not even Arab, let alone from our tribe. We're not even going to let our daughter marry another Arab who's not from our specific tribe. And you're from Pakistan. Forget if you're like from Africa, or forget about if you're like Central Asian. This is a very common attitude and sentiment, unfortunately, that we have in the Muslim world. Now, is this attitude the most evil thing that you can imagine? That's the way a liberal would think about it. Like, this is the most evil thing imaginable, that you prefer that your daughter marry only from your same race. This is the most evil thing that you can imagine. I think that there could be some basis for having that attitude, but in many cases it's not correct, or it's not ideal. But I wouldn't say that these are terrible, evil people. Sometimes it has a reasonable basis. They want to be connected as parents to their grandchildren, and if their grandchildren are not from the same ethnicity, because they're half Pakistani, or they're half Iranian, or they're half Tunisian, then they won't be able to connect in the same way with their grandchildren. That's their concern. It's not a hatred for skin color or a hatred for a certain race. Now, that might be the case, but it's not always the case. So I think that we have to be nuanced. Like we have to be a little bit nuanced and not just adopt like the liberal perspective that this is the worst type of racism ever imaginable. And this is the worst type of evil possible. That's not actually reflective of Islam and even the Islamic scholarly tradition. If you go to the books of fiqh, you will see some fuqaha mention like a consideration for the tribe or the background. Like that's part of lineage. Like when you are considering in terms of compatibility, kufuah, like you're looking at the compatibility of a potential suitor, potential husband for your daughter, there is consideration of tribe, there is consideration of even race. It is mentioned. So if you have the view that, oh, this is the worst type of racism imaginable, and this is the worst type of evil imaginable, then you're going to throw a lot of these fiqh books in the trash. And you can say, oh, these people are racists. These fuqaha are racist. And that's what some of these liberal Muslims do, actually. So like, let's have a nuanced perspective on this and not just adopt a kind of colorblind liberal attitude. This super chat, last word says, brother, I love your work, but you're going too easy on him. You know, everyone's racist is a false cop out, like a liar saying, well, everyone lies. His geo comment about blacks is also atrocious. Yeah, so like the whole point of this, like when he doubles down and he says, yeah, I'm racist, what does that mean? He says that he has black friends. He says that he has no problem with black people. Is racism just mean that you have a problem with a person's skin color? Like what does it actually mean to be racist? Like what is the racism that he is talking about? He's saying that given the proportion of a certain type of violent behavior from a certain demographic, I want to avoid that demographic for my self-preservation because I'm noticing a pattern and I want to preserve myself. This is the racism that he is espousing. So if that's racist, then everyone can be considered racist to a certain extent. Okay, everyone can be racist if noticing patterns amongst the population in order to preserve yourself, and you make decisions based on pattern recognition or probability or proportionality, then everyone is going to be naturally racist. Now, there's a certain extent where that Islamically becomes unacceptable, and I've acknowledged that. I'm not saying that you should just say that black people commit a higher proportion of crime because of these crime statistics, therefore I'm going to boycott all black people, or I'm not going to associate with black people. I'm not saying that that is acceptable. Or for example, with Judaism. Oh, look at the number of Jews that are supporting the genocide of Palestinians. Therefore, I'm not going to interact with Jews at all. I'm going to boycott any type of Jew that I see. I'm going to assume that he's a genocide supporter. That's not the extent that I would take it. But you can't say that there's nothing to that, or even the thought crossing your head. Tell me in the chat, like you're a Muslim and there's a potential business partner and he's Jewish and you don't know anything about him other than the fact that he's Jewish. And then you have another person, like just say he is white or say he's Chinese or say that he's Mexican. You don't know anything else about the people except their race. Tell me very honestly, like you're going to prefer or you're going to have no consideration of race in making that kind of decision on who to be your business partner. Now, be honest, like given everything that we've seen since October 7th and even prior to October 7th, I don't think any Muslim can honestly tell me that they wouldn't take that into consideration. The point that I'm making is that everyone is racist. Like what that means, if that means is pattern recognition, then yeah, it seems like that's the case. Who can deny that? Islam just simply puts limits on that so that you don't violate people's rights. But the fact that you're going to take certain things into consideration in different decisions that you have to make, that's just a reality that everyone engages in. And it's only kind of liberal political correctness that wants to depict that as the worst kind of evil possible. Look at the American Muslim community, and you'll notice even within cities, like you'll have the Arab masjid or the Egyptian masjid, for example, the Pakistani masjid, the Bangladeshi masjid, the Sudanese or the Somali masjid, the Bosnian masjid, the Albanian masjid, like you have this kind of self-segregation within different parts of city, like a major city. You'll have a little Arabia area of the community. You'll have a city like Dearborn, Michigan, mostly Lebanese, Syrian in that area, Palestinians as well. You'll have New Jersey, and there'll be masjid areas with a lot of markets and restaurants, and they'll tend to be one particular ethnicity. Is that something acceptable in Islam? I would like you all to tell me in the chat. Is that something acceptable? Or should we try to break up all of these communities and say, no, this is racist? Why do you prefer as a Palestinian to be near other Palestinians? Like why you as a Somali prefer to be in Minnesota with other Somalis? Like you should just go to the Bosnian masjid. You should just go to the Desi masjid. Why are you being racist? Why are you segregating? This is a question. This is a question for you. And my perspective is that no, like it's something natural, like you want to be with your particular group. And Islam actually accepts that that is your preference. And there was an explicit hadith on this from the Prophet ﷺ, where a Sahabi came and asked the Prophet ﷺ, I prefer to be with my people, with my tribe. Is that asabiya? Like, is that jahiliyyah? Is that ignorance? Is that tribalistic ignorance that I prefer to be with my own tribe? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no. What is a problem, ignorant tribalism, is if you prefer or you violate the rights of others based on tribe. So the Prophet ﷺ is making that nuanced distinction. Liberalism doesn't make that distinction. Just the mere fact that you prefer to be with your own tribe or your own group, your own ethnicity, however you define it, that is racist and that is immoral and that is wrong. Everyone has to mix. And Islam actually doesn't require that. Islam historically, and if we look at the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, that is not required by Islam. You can prefer to be with your nationality, with your ethnicity. The only problem is you don't violate the rights of others and say that I'm not going to deal with you. I'm not going to give your rights as my Muslim brother. Like, I'm not going to return the salam. When you say salam alaikum, I'm not going to say wa alaikum assalam because you're not my tribe. I'm not going to give zakat to you because you're not part of my tribe. I'm not going to visit you when you're sick or feed you when you're hungry because you're not part of my tribe. I am going to have su'adhan, okay, or I'm going to gossip and backbite you, and I'm going to eat your flesh with namima and with ghaiba because you're not from my tribe. Simply because you're not from my tribe. Right? That is jahiliyyah. That is asabiyah. That is prohibited by Islam. But the fact that you go to the Bosnian masjid because you're Bosnian and you go to the Bangladeshi masjid because you're Bengali, that's not prohibited by Islam. Isn't that the self-segregation that is considered racist by liberals like Piers Morgan? So let's have a little bit more nuance in our understanding of these issues.
If you were tired of hearing about slavery and the Holocaust and Jim Crow, we're done hearing about that. You guys
I'm not
overplayed your
done
hand.
hearing about that.
This kind of narrative that Nick is using, like, let me give you some criticism against Nick. Okay, so you don't think that I just agree with everything that he says. He's talking about slavery, Holocaust, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, and this is used to browbeat the whites, and this is used to shame the white people, and we're tired of this, and we're not going to be shamed anymore. Like, this is his point that he's making. How these kinds of events, historical facts or historical events, are being used politically in a narrative to depict whites as evil and irredeemable. This is actually the opposite, if you look historically, that in fact, the self-perception of the West is that they have overcome hatred. They have overcome the biases of racism, the oppression of slavery, anti-Jew hatred, and genocide that led to the Holocaust, that the whites have progressed. They have evolved an everlasting pursuit of freedom and equality of all people. And that's why the West, led by the white man, is superior to the rest of the world. Superior to the Muslims, superior to the Chinese, superior to the Africans, superior to the Hispanics, superior to all of these other racial groups and religions, because the white West has actually progressed. And their entire sense of superiority as the West, okay, maybe they don't put it in racial terms all the time, but they put it in terms of, we have achieved all of this because of our belief in liberalism, moral progress. We have progressed. We have freed the blacks. We have abolished slavery. We have defeated Hitler. It was the whites. It was America that defeated Hitler. Was it not? It is the European man that gave women their rights and freed the women from the burqa or from minor marriage or from being stuck in the home. It is the whites or the Europeans, the Western progressives who have adopted liberalism, who have actually brought humanity into this age of modernity and progress. So actually these narratives are used by whites and by liberal Europeans to pat themselves on the back and to distinguish themselves from these other religions and these other races and these other civilizations. So what Nick is saying is not actually the whole truth. Like, this is not actually accurate. Maybe it's Nick himself or others that they pat themselves on the back. Yeah, we abolished slavery. It was the whites. It was the Europeans who abolished slavery. And they pat themselves on the back and they say, look at the Muslims. They only follow our lead. In certain contexts, they want to rail against Jews, for example, and say that, oh, you're using our history against us. You're using our history of slavery, Jim Crow, or whatever, using that against us, to browbeat us. He's playing victim, okay, in that context, when it's against Jews who are more powerful. According to Nick Fuentes, these Jews are more powerful as a demographic, and they're oppressing whites. So Nick is playing the victim. Oh, you know, why are you browbeating us? We just want to have our sense of pride as white men, as white Europeans. But then in other contexts, when he's talking to Muslims or he's talking against Muslims or debating against Muslims, he beats his chest and he says, yeah, we colonized you. We were able to progress. We were able to eliminate these backwards practices and raise our IQ, unlike you Muslims living in the mud huts. You see, so using progressivism, he code switches depending on who he talks to. This is a big inconsistency amongst the nationalists that Muslims should be aware of. You should be aware of this game that they're playing.
See, this attitude is why you're losing. When you say
Who
poor
am I losing
old
to?
white people,
Who
these
am I
poor
losing
old
to?
white people, Matt. Oh, you're losing to me.
You're losing to me. I mean, he's right. Piers Morgan, that narrative is losing. And his attitude, his attitude is not going to be doing him any favors. Like, to be just, what's the word for it? Trite? Oh, you know, the white people, the poor white people. I mean, there's that kind of attitude is not going to play well with whites, if you haven't noticed. Like, it's not going to play well with these white Europeans. And like I said, they have these grievances, and there is a reality to those grievances. Like, their world is coming tumbling down. They are being destroyed. Their families are being destroyed, like other groups were destroyed. And you can say that, well, yeah, they deserve it because they were overseeing colonialism. They were seeing the extinction of many peoples, such as the many Native American tribes, the Aboriginal tribes, many African tribes. The Europeans perpetrated many mass killings, extermination events throughout the world. So I'm not going to shed any tears for them. This is not a kind of Islamic attitude that we should have. This is not Islam. Like, there's no collective guilt. We don't accept collective guilt. We don't say that, well, white people, they did this in the past, therefore their descendants are responsible today for those crimes. We don't say that. That's the Islamic position. And if I want to view the world through an Islamic lens, I wouldn't blame current generation of whites for the crimes of their ancestors. Now, if I want to play Nick's game and I want to look at things through a racial lens, and I want to do pattern recognition, as he mentioned, and he said everyone does pattern recognition, everyone is racist. Okay, then that would apply, wouldn't it? Like, wouldn't that apply? And well, we have a history of whites committing genocide historically. Shouldn't we also have this kind of pattern recognition that, well, you're white, and if we allow you to have power, if we allow you to develop these technologies and gain material power and wealth, that you're going to perpetrate more genocides? Like, isn't that also the same kind of pattern recognition that he was advocating for blacks and Jews? Okay, so here we see another kind of contradiction in Nick's points. I pointed these things out. I pointed that out with debates with, like, Keith Woods, for example, who is Nick's friend, maybe his actual teacher in some issues, and they can't deal with that contradiction. Okay, pattern recognition is fine for everyone except whites. That's the implication. Like, when people say that, okay, we have slavery, that it took place, we have colonialism, we have genocide, Hitler, for example. Like, when whites gain power, it seems like they commit these mass atrocities. That's the historical record. So why can't we use pattern recognition in the same way that you use against blacks? That's the kind of argument that you can make if we want to look at the world through a racial lens, which is in certain cases what Nick is advocating. While we look at things through an Islamic lens, then no, we shouldn't saddle whites today for the sins of their fathers. We shouldn't do that, and that's not acceptable. But in the same way, we wouldn't saddle all black people with the sins of some black people, for example, or all immigrants with the sins of some immigrants. I mean, these are the nuances that we should think about, shouldn't we? Like, shouldn't we just have a more sophisticated understanding of these issues?